The low thrum of the hotel bar was a language Zara understood. It was the sound of money, of secrets whispered over ice clinking in crystal glasses. She was fluent in the spaces between words, the flick of an eye, the tightening of a jaw. As a freelance translator, her job was to live in those spaces, to bridge worlds for men who built empires on handshakes and threats. Tonight, however, she was off the clock, a ghost in a beige dress, nursing a glass of water and waiting for the courage to go back to her room on the 12th floor. The courage never came. Instead, he did. Marcus slid onto the stool beside her, his presence a sudden, suffocating drop in atmospheric pressure. He smelled of the same expensive gin and casual cruelty she remembered. "Zara," he said, his voice as smooth poison. "Fancy meeting you here. I heard you were in Seoul. Little Bird told me." She kept her eyes on her glass, on the way the light fractured through the ice. "Hello, Marcus. I have to go." His hand clamped down on her wrist, his fingers digging into the delicate bones. It was the same grip, the same casual ownership. "Not so fast. We have things to discuss. You left in a hurry last time. You left things unresolved." "There's nothing to resolve," she said, her voice tight but even. She had practiced this tone in the mirror 100 times, for a day she prayed would never come. "Let go of me. You think you can just walk away?" He leaned in, his breath hot and foul against her ear. "After everything I gave you? You're nothing without me. A pretty little charity case I picked up." Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage of bone. But her face remained a mask of calm. She had learned long ago that fear was a currency he loved to spend. She would not make him rich tonight. She slowly turned her head, her gaze finally meeting his. She did not see the man in the $1,000 suit. She saw the monster who left bruises in the shape of his fingers on her skin, who whispered apologies that sounded like threats. "Let go." He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Or what?" He tightened his grip, pulling her slightly off the stool. "You'll scream? Go ahead. Make a scene. Remind everyone what you are." That was when she moved. It was not a thought, but an instinct honed by survival. She drove the pointed heel of her shoe down hard onto his instep. He roared in pain, his grip faltering for a fraction of a second. It was all she needed. She wrenched her arm free, shoved him backward with all her strength, and ran. She did not look back. The sounds of him shouting, of a glass shattering, faded behind her as she flew through the opulent lobby. Marble floors blurred beneath her feet. Her only thought was the elevator, the silver doors a promise of escape. She jabbed the call button, her breath coming in ragged sobs she refused to let escape her lips. A chime echoed, soft and polite. The doors slid open. Inside, a man stood alone. He was a statue carved from shadows and steel. His suit was a deep charcoal, a Tom Ford by the cut of it, fitting his broad shoulders so perfectly it seemed to have been stitched onto him. His hands were clasped loosely in front of him, one thumb stroking the other in a slow, deliberate rhythm. He was not looking at her, but at the reflection of the chaotic lobby and the polished bronze walls of the elevator. He seemed utterly unmoved by the commotion, an island of absolute stillness in her storm. She stumbled inside, her back hitting the far wall as she frantically pressed the button for her floor. Marcus was coming. She could hear his enraged shouts getting closer. "Close," she whispered, a desperate prayer to the machinery. "Please, close." The man turned his head. It was a slow, economical movement. His eyes were not black, as she first thought, but a brown so dark they absorbed the light. They held no surprise, no pity, no curiosity. They held only a chilling, predatory calm. He watched her, his gaze taking in her panicked breathing, the red mark blooming on her wrist, the terror in her eyes. He did not speak. The doors began to slide shut just as Marcus reached them, his face a mask of purple fury. He lunged, his hand trying to jam the doors open. "You are not getting away from me, you." The man in the suit moved. It was not fast, but it was brutally efficient. He lifted one hand and pressed a single button on the panel. The door close button. He held it down with an unyielding pressure. The elevator doors, meeting the resistance of his command, ignored Marcus's hand and continued their inexorable slide, trapping Marcus's fingers for a brutal moment before pushing him back out into the lobby. His howl of pain was cut off as the doors sealed with a soft, final hiss. Silence descended, a heavy, suffocating silence broken only by the sound of her own frantic heartbeat and the gentle hum of the elevator ascending. Zara leaned against the wall, trying to catch her breath, her body trembling with leftover adrenaline. She risked a glance at her silent companion. He had returned to his neutral position, hands clasped, gaze forward. He had saved her, but his expression was that of a man who had merely swatted a fly. An inconvenience. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice thin. He did not reply. He did not even look at her. The elevator continued its smooth, silent climb. 10, 11, 12, her floor. The doors slid open. She practically fell out, desperate for the safety of her room. She fumbled with her key card, her hand shaking too much to get it in the slot. Behind her, the elevator doors remained open. She could feel his eyes on her back, a physical weight. She finally got the door open and slipped inside, slamming it shut and throwing the deadbolt. She leaned against the wood, her eyes closed, her body sliding down to the floor. She thought that was the end of it. A terrifying encounter, a strange rescue. She would check out in the morning and never look back. That was the moment everything changed. A soft knock echoed on her door. Not the frantic pounding of Marcus, but something controlled, patient. She held her breath, her blood turning to ice. A piece of paper slid under the door. She stared at it, her heart seizing in her chest. Slowly, she reached for it. It was thick, expensive cardstock. On it, in elegant typescript, were 2 words. Penthouse.
Now. It was not a request.
Below the words was a key card, identical to her own but, for the single letter P embossed in gold. He hadn't just saved her. He had claimed her. She was no longer running for Marcus. She was running towards something infinitely more dangerous. The elevator was not an escape. It was a cage, and it was taking her to the top. She told herself it was survival instinct. She told herself she had no choice. But as she stood and picked up the key card, a deeper, colder truth settled in her soul. She had been a witness. To what, she was not yet sure. But in his world, witnesses were either liabilities to be eliminated or assets to be controlled. She had a sinking feeling she knew which one he had decided she would be. The walk back to the elevator was the longest of her life. The doors opened to the same empty car. She slid the penthouse key card into its slot, and the elevator began to ascend again, past her floor, past all the numbered floors, into the silent, unknown territory at the top of the world. The doors opened directly into a sprawling living space. It was a testament to minimalist wealth, all glass, chrome, and shades of gray. The entire south wall was a window overlooking the glittering sprawl of Seoul. And standing in the middle of it all, silhouetted against the city lights, was him. Kwon Jin-woo. 2 other men, dressed in similar dark suits, stood near the entrance. They bowed their heads slightly as she entered, but said nothing. Their presence was as unobtrusive and as deadly as the polished granite floors. Jin-woo turned. He had removed his jacket, and the white shirt he wore was stretched taut across his shoulders. He held a glass of amber liquid. "You are a complication I did not anticipate, miss." "Zara," she supplied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Zara Adebayo." "Zara," he repeated. He said her name differently than anyone else had. It was not a question, not a greeting. It was a statement of fact, as if he were taking ownership of the word itself. "Your friend in the lobby, Marcus, has been dealt with. He will not trouble you again." The finality in his tone sent a shiver down her spine. Dealt with. He was loud. Untidy. "I dislike untidy things." He took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving hers. "He also made inquiries about you at the front desk."
"And about me."
He was asking the wrong questions to the wrong people. The floor seemed to drop out from under her. This wasn't just about him witnessing her assault. Her problem had become his problem, and Kwon Jinwoo looked like a man who solved his problems permanently. "What do you want from me?" she asked, forcing herself to stand tall. "For now, your silence. And your cooperation." He gestured to a plush gray sofa. "You will stay here. You are a loose end. I do not like loose ends." Days bled into a week. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage. She had a luxurious bedroom, clothes that appeared in the closet as if by magic, and food prepared by a silent chef. But the doors were locked, the windows were reinforced, and she was never, ever alone. One of his two main guards, a stern man named Mr. Choi, was her constant shadow. Jin-woo himself was a phantom. He would be gone for days, then appear without warning, sitting in the living room in the dead of night, staring out at the city he seemed to own. In those rare moments, she would watch him. She noticed the small things. The way a tiny, almost invisible scar sliced through his left eyebrow. The way he always wore a vintage watch on his right wrist, its leather band worn smooth. He never spoke of his business, but she pieced it together from the fragments of hushed phone calls and the grim faces of the men who came and went. Empire. Territory.
Debt.
These were the words that built his world. One night, she found him in his study. The door was ajar, a sliver of light cutting through the darkness. He was standing before his desk, his back to her, looking at a small, silver frame. His shoulders were rigid, his entire posture coiled with a grief so profound it seemed to suck the air from the room. Curious, and perhaps foolish, she took a step closer. She could just see the edge of the photograph. It was a woman. Young, with a gentle smile and eyes that seemed too soft for this world of steel and glass. He must have sensed her presence. He spun around, his face a mask of cold fury. The transformation was so sudden, so total, it stole her breath. He snatched the frame from the desk and shoved it into a drawer, slamming it shut. "Get out," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. She didn't move. Who was she? The question was out before she could stop it. His eyes narrowed. He crossed the room in 2 long strides, his body crowding hers against the doorframe. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from him, could smell the faint, clean scent of cedar and smoke that always clung to him. "You will learn," he whispered, his voice dangerously soft, "that there are doors you do not open, questions you do not ask." His gaze dropped to her mouth, and for a heart-stopping second, she thought he would kiss her. The space between them crackled with a tension that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with a dark, terrifying magnetism. Then he stepped back, the spell broken. "Mr. Choi will see you to your room." He turned his back on her, a clear dismissal. That was the first crack in his armor. She had seen his wound, a woman he had failed to protect. And in that moment, she began to understand the cold, brutal control he exerted over his world. It was the only way he knew to keep the ghosts at bay. The danger, when it escalated, did so with chilling precision. A package arrived, addressed not to him, but to her. The guest in the penthouse. Mr. Choi intercepted it, his face grim. Jin-woo was summoned. He opened the box himself, his movements deliberate. Inside, nestled on a bed of black silk, was a single, perfect white orchid, its stem snapped in 2. Zara watched his face. For a single, unguarded moment, she saw the same raw grief she had seen in the study. His jaw clenched, a muscle twitching violently. He looked from the broken flower to her, and his eyes were dark with a storm of emotions she could not name. "Chairman Park," he said, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. "He knows you are here." He closed the box. "It is no longer safe. I will arrange for you to leave the country. A car will take you to a private airfield in 2 hours." He was giving her an out, a chance to run, to disappear back into her old life. She should have been relieved. She should have been packing her bags. But all she could see was the look on his face when he saw that flower. He was expecting to fail again, expecting to lose someone else he was protecting. "No," she said. Jin-woo looked at her as if she had spoken in a foreign language. "No. They know I'm with you. If I leave, I'll just be a target out in the open. A loose end, Like you said, she met his gaze, her own resolve hardening. I'm safer here. With you. It was a deliberate choice. A line crossed. She was no longer just his prisoner. She was choosing to stay in the storm because leaving felt like a different kind of death. He stared at her for a long time, the silence stretching between them. She saw something shift in his eyes, surprise, confusion, and something else. Something that looked unnervingly like respect. As you wish, he said finally. But know this, Zara. From this moment on, you are no longer a guest. You are a part of this. And the price for that is absolute. The war between them was tested sooner than she could have imagined. Chairman Park, his rival, was not content with sending flowers. He made his next move personal. He found her past. A phone was delivered to her room. It rang once. When she answered, the voice on the other end was not a stranger. It was Marcus. Zara? Oh God, Zara. You have to help me, he was sobbing, his voice stripped of all its arrogance, replaced by raw terror. These men, they have me. They said you need to tell your new boyfriend to give back the Incheon port contracts. They want to trade me for them. Jin-woo was in the room before the call even ended, Mr. Choi at his side. He took the phone from her trembling hand and listened for a moment before ending the call and tossing the device onto the bed. He is a liability, Jin-woo stated, his voice devoid of emotion. Chairman Park is using a broken tool. It will be disposed of. Zara stared at him, horrified. Disposed of? You mean you're going to let them kill him? He is nothing to me. He's a person, she shot back, her voice rising. A horrible, abusive person. But you can't just let him die. It is the cleanest way, Jin-woo said, his face unreadable. A trade would show weakness. Ignoring the threat and eliminating the pawn is the logical move. She looked at this man, this cold, calculating predator, and saw the cost of his world. Human lives were just pieces on a chessboard. But she couldn't accept it. She couldn't have Marcus's death on her conscience, no matter how much she hated him. She had to do something. That night, she crossed a line she could not uncross. While Jin-woo was in a meeting, she used the laptop he'd provided her. She still had contacts from her translation work, including a dogged financial journalist who owed her a favor. She sent an anonymous, encrypted email. It contained a single piece of information she'd overheard, a detail about a shell corporation Chairman Park was using to launder money, completely unrelated to the port contracts. It wasn't enough to bring him down, but it was enough to cause a massive, inconvenient headache. A distraction. She was playing his game now, moving pieces on the board. The distraction worked, but it had an unintended consequence. It enraged Park. The trade was called off. Instead, Park's men ambushed Jin-woo's car 2 days later, when Zara was with him. The first bullet shattered the armored window beside her head. Jin-woo reacted instantly. He threw his body over hers, shielding her as the car spun out of control. Stay down, he roared, his voice a thunderclap in the enclosed space. The world devolved into a symphony of destruction, the shriek of tires, the percussive pop of gunfire, the shattering of glass. He pushed her out of the car and into the relative cover of an alleyway. He moved through the violence like it was a language he was born speaking. Every movement was precise, economical, and lethal. She watched, her heart in her throat, as he and his men returned fire with terrifying efficiency. In the chaos, a man broke through their flank, heading straight for her. He raised his gun. There was no time to scream. Jin-woo saw it. He lunged, tackling the man, but another appeared behind him. Zara saw the glint of a knife. Without thinking, she grabbed a loose brick from the crumbling alley wall and threw it with all her might. It struck the second attacker in the side of the head. He staggered, giving Jin-woo the opening he needed. The fight was over in seconds. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the distant wail of sirens. Jin-woo stood over the two bodies, his chest heaving. He turned to her, his eyes wild. He stalked toward her, and for a second, she thought he was furious. He grabbed her by the shoulders, his grip like iron. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his eyes scanning her frantically. "No," she whispered. Are you? He ignored the question. He just stared at her, his face a maelstrom of emotions. And then he said it, the confession that was more dangerous than any declaration of love. When I saw him raise that gun, I thought he would take you. His voice was rough, raw. Like they took Mafia. He said her name. The ghost was finally given a voice. The weight of his past, his failure, hung in the air between them. It was a wound he had just exposed to her. She reached up, her hand trembling, and touched the scar on his eyebrow. I told myself I stayed for survival, she confessed in turn, her voice barely audible. I was lying to myself. They stood there, in a filthy alley smelling of rain and gunpowder, and admitted the truth. This was no longer about survival. It was about something far more complicated, something that had taken root in the darkness and bloomed in violence. Back in the silent, sterile safety of the penthouse, the adrenaline faded, leaving behind a heavy, charged awareness. The finality of her choice settled over her. Chairman Park wouldn't stop. He had tried to break Jin-woo through force and failed. Now he would use intelligence. He would find her weakness. It came a day later. A simple text message to the new phone Jin-woo had given her. It was a photo. Her mother, walking her beagle in the park near their home in Chicago. The sun was shining. Her mother was smiling. The caption underneath was simple. A lovely day for a walk. The threat was absolute, unmistakable, and aimed directly at her heart. She showed the phone to Jin-woo. She watched the cold, surgical fury settle over his features. He would go to war for this. He would burn Park's entire empire to the ground. But she knew that wasn't enough. A war would have casualties, and she couldn't risk her mother being one of them. She had to end this.
Now.
She was not the same woman who had stumbled into that elevator weeks ago. She had been living in the predator's den, and she had learned his language. I have a plan, she said, her voice clear and steady. He looked at her surprised. There's a lieutenant in your organization, she began. Lee. I've seen him with you. He never looks you in the eye. He checks his phone constantly. He's your weak link. Park has gotten to him. Jin-woo's eyes narrowed, but he listened. We use him, she continued, her mind racing, connecting the pieces. We feed Lee false information. We set up a meeting with Park. But not a trade. A final meeting. And I will be the bait. Absolutely not, he bit out, the words like chips of ice. You don't have a choice, she countered, stepping closer to him. A war is messy. This has to be surgical. You said it yourself. You dislike untidy things. This is the cleanest way. And it has to be my choice. He came after my family. This is my fight. He saw the steel in her spine, the unwavering resolve in her eyes. He was looking at his equal. He gave a single, sharp nod. The meeting was set for a private gallery in Gangnam, one of Park's holdings. It was all white walls and stark, modern art, a sterile place for a bloody transaction. Zara wore a black dress, a stark contrast to the beige one she'd worn the night this all began. She felt like a different person. She was. She walked in alone as planned. Chairman Park was waiting for her, flanked by two of his men. He was older, with a deceptively gentle face that did not match the coldness in his eyes. The brave little translator, he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You have caused me a great deal of trouble. You targeted my mother, she replied, her voice level. That was your mistake. His smile faltered. Jin-woo is a sentimental fool. He lost one woman because of his weakness. He will lose you, too. This was the moment. She was supposed to give the signal. But something was wrong. The room felt too quiet. Park was too confident. He had a secret. He pulled a small pistol from his jacket and aimed it at her chest. Did you really think I would trust a traitor? He sneered. Lee told me everything. Jin-woo's men are waiting outside the wrong entrance. Fear, cold and sharp, tried to claw its way up her throat, but she shoved it down. She remembered something Jin-woo had told her in a rare, quiet moment. Park's vanity is his greatest flaw. He cannot stand to be seen as anything less than all-knowing. She laughed. A soft, dismissive sound. Park's eyes narrowed. You find this amusing? I find you predictable, she said, forcing a confidence she did not feel. Did you really think Jinwoo would trust Lee? Lee was our messenger boy. He delivered the invitation we wanted you to have. You walked right into the trap. Doubt flickered across Park's face. It was just a second, a tiny crack in his arrogant facade. But it was enough. In that second of hesitation, the skylight above them shattered. Jinwoo and his men descended on ropes, a silent, lethal rain of black-clad figures. The fight was swift, brutal, and over before Park could even process the betrayal. When it was done, Jinwoo stood before a kneeling Park. There was no mercy in his eyes. He dealt with the threat, and then he walked to her. He gently took her arm, his touch surprisingly soft, and led her away from the carnage, back into the Seoul night. They didn't speak on the ride back to the penthouse. When they stood once more in the living room, overlooking the city lights, the silence was not empty. It was filled with everything that had happened and everything that was about to. He turned to her. You are not her, he said, his voice quiet. He was releasing the ghost of Minesio. You are an anchor. In a storm I created. It was the closest he would ever come to a poem. It was his acknowledgement of her strength, her place in his world. He knew the cost of what she had done. Her old life was gone, burned away in alleys and art galleries. I can give you a new life, he offered, his voice formal. A new name, a new identity. Anywhere in the world. You will be protected. You will be free. It was the out she had refused once before. The easy escape. She could take it. She could walk away and try to forget the smell of cedar and smoke, the weight of his body shielding hers, the dark intensity of his eyes. She looked out the window at the endless river of lights, a city that had tried to consume her and had instead reforged her. Then she turned back to him. He was watching her, his face impassive, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he held his breath. She walked not to the door, but to his desk. The silver frame with Minesio's picture was there, face up. He had taken it out again, a reminder of his failure. Zara reached down, her fingers brushing against the cold metal. She looked at the smiling woman, a ghost from a life before her. Then, slowly, deliberately, she picked up the frame and turned it face down on the desk. She did not have to say a word. The choice was made. She was not running from his world. She was claiming her place within it. She was home,